So maybe 2-3 words about myself so that you can also get my context, why I'm here actually. My background is in international relations. I'm a PhD holder in China-Africa relations, and I'm studying China-Africa relations since 2003. So we are quite aware what is happening actually in the last decade in this area. So today what I'm trying to discuss with you or to present to you is what is actually this Belt and Road Initiative and how is that connected to Africa? So how can we, or what kind of long-term impacts are we expecting when we talk about Belt and Road Initiative and Africa? So next slide. I don't know, can we turn down the lights a bit? Otherwise we cannot see the pictures. That would be really good. So this is a map I always present when I do presentations, and I ask people what do you see here? It's a very simple question, but what do you see here? And what you should see, or what? Yes, you should see something. So it's a rhetorical question. I'm not expecting you to answer me, but it takes usually several minutes until people realize what they see here. Okay, you see the absence of the American continent. That's what you see here. The absence of the American continent. So, by saying this, you see that the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese version of the Belt and Road Initiative, is absolutely Eurasian-oriented. Meaning that starting in China, it is primarily Eurasian-oriented. So the idea of Belt and Road Initiative, probably even your idea back in the 70s, is the land bridge that we have been discussing also probably yesterday and also today. And within this picture or map, you will see also Africa. Africa is prominent. Africa is not entirely in the center, but on the left side. And it should be part of the Belt and Road idea. But we know that Africa is actually a latecomer. Africa is an afterthought in China. It was not a primary address for the Belt and Road Initiative. It was the afterthought. So, and therefore it took people like Professor He, I mentioned her name again, or Professor Justin Ifu Lin from Beijing University, to bring Africa into the picture. They were the first one writing, starting 2013, 2014, writing about Africa and that Africa should be part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and Africa should be, it should be considered as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And they coined the term one belt, one road, one continent, including the African continent. But we will see later that we cannot even talk about the continent. So, and then the next thing, how do we understand Belt and Road Initiative from the African perspective? That we see that the initiative itself is a very open-minded, or it's a very open and overarching idea. It's an idea. It's an idea. It's an open idea. So if the idea is open, then anybody can come in and dock to this idea. We heard earlier about 16+1 initiative in Central and Eastern European countries. This is one such an idea. If it's good or bad is a different discussion, but it's one such an idea. So the Belt and Road Initiative is creating a place for rewriting history, rewriting or creating space for new voices that have been subdued in the last years, decades. They can come out of their hidden places and start referring to their own past histories, past ideas. And we heard this morning also in the keynote speech, we have an Indian narrative now coming out. The Indian is partially opposing the Obour idea, but partially also coming up with their own Indian history or grand history going back in history many years. And so we hear new voices. The Belt and Road Initiative within the African context is creating new voices, new ideas, new narratives, which is a good thing. And third point, it's primarily an infrastructural undertaking. So Belt and Road Initiative is, we don't have yet political institutionalization. We have infrastructural ideas. We have corridors, but we don't have yet political institutions. So if we talk about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or the Silk Road Bank, these are just connected to infrastructure. They are not political ideas. And interestingly, this idea fits perfectly into the current African needs. What is the current African need? The current African need is infrastructure development. Africa wants infrastructure, and the aspiration, I'm going back here to the Agenda 2063, that has been also coincidentally coming up 2013, together with the Belt and Road Initiative. Africa wants a good infrastructure connection, a good internal interconnectivity. So the idea of coming from China is perfectly fitting into the idea actually happening or discussed within the African continent. And on the right side, you will see the map. These are different corridors within Africa or in African countries that has been at some point thought through, at some point created by different players as very important corridors. So the question remains here, who is going to finance all these corridors?
Okay. Yeah. On the development of the new record system for them, first of all, goes way beyond anything which mankind in Russia or elsewhere has seen. They have no knowledge of this as such. They have now achieved, together with other people, they have achieved an accomplishment of the development of a system of what is really a system, a work system. And
this Belt and Road Initiative?
What?
Are you referring to the Belt and Road Initiative?
The system itself.
Okay.
In other words, the thing is essentially motivated by what the population has developed.
Yes.
What is opened up on.
Yes.
Then what happens? Then people come in, and they do some work. Mm-hmm. By this time, their mind is way beyond anything they've done before, in terms of an art project.
Yes.
So what the job is, do it.
Yes, that's exactly. And I'm fully with you on this, because if you are following the debate within Africa, or the African continent, or African institutions, so what we have in 2013, what we call this, the Africa we want, the Agenda 2063, is nothing else than literally, as you mentioned also, infrastructural development that the continent has been needing for decades, actually, and never happened. So we see now an actor coming in, China as an actor coming in, and literally taking or doing part of those needed works. And this is a huge, at least from the African perspective, this is a huge plus for many African countries. So, and the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is actually coming only in 2013, we see that it is helping what has been taking place on the continent between China and African countries since the year 2000, what we call the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. For those who are not familiar with that forum, it is similar forum like the 16+1, where we have at least 48 African countries on the one hand, on the one side, and on the other side you have China. And within this forum, Chinese position has been always not changing, but it has been always adapting to the current needed. Yes, I will come to that point. That it has changed. It has changed, and I'll explain how it has changed. But what I meant is, it is happening every 3 years. But every 3 years, this forum has been adapting gradually, in my view, to the needs of China, actually, and not only to the needs of Africa. But what we see since 2015, since Johannesburg, is that China has been entirely moving, actually, its priority from social-related aspects more towards hard infrastructure development aspects. And we see this, that China has clearly declared that they would like to see the China-Africa cooperation moving into development of highways, regional aviation networks, or industrialization. And also we see that China has been given a lot of priority to African Union's program for infrastructure development in Africa. This program has approximately 51 different programs, and this is translated into 400 different projects, physical projects. And I speak about ports and streets and telecommunication lines, whatever you require for a nation to function or for a continent to function. And China has also been very clear since 2015 that they want to cooperate with Africa more on infrastructural projects that are creating regional interconnectivity. That is where the Belt and Road Initiative comes again into the system. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that is actually a primarily infrastructural topic. So China's new approach, and now maybe I'm putting that emphasis here. China has been also changing the emphasis since at least 2016, which is last year, that they clearly articulated they want to have with Africa a cooperation on industrial development and agricultural development. So it is again, it's a physical-oriented approach. The precondition for a developing Africa is actually that there are good infrastructures in place. Good infrastructures first, and then the human development aspect has to be, the human resources development needs to take place at the same time. So what we see now, what we see in Africa now is, since at least 2 years, is a growing corridorization in the China-Africa relation. As a corridorization, I mean here is that not single countries are any more important, but entire regions are becoming more important for China. This is a huge departure from single bilateral country-based approach towards corridor development. And if you look at African corridors, the map on the right, we see right now, as we speak today, there are around 33 different corridors that has been either developed or are under development or are thought out and needs to be developed. And corridors do nothing else than combining two different areas. And by doing so, also creating a development initiative, a development paradigm. And China is a big player in this corridorization movement or happening in Africa. The same what we have been hearing earlier with Bulgaria, but if you go back into Central Asian countries, you have the same development. So Belt and Road Initiative is supporting these existing ideas within Africa. So from the African perspective, now the question towards China is, at least in some sub-regions, is, okay, is our relation to China helping us to advance those infrastructure developments we are planning? Is regional interconnectivity happening with our connectivity, with our relation with China? And is industrialization process actually happening through this relationship? That is the question. No, it's not. Yes.
You have to have these characteristics. They are acting when those characteristics are coming into play. Now, for example, I know the some members of the talent there, and we've worked on that. I worked on it in part with my wife, and so forth. No, this is something. The idea lying in the minds of the scientist in there. You see that the whole thing emerges in that way. Okay. What happens is, the danger is that people begin to make monkeying around with the interpretation of how this thing came about. Right now, in a short period of time, this operation has really exploded.
True.
It's exploded through other people, other groups of people. But it's that. There is a connection, a very important connection of relevance, not of precise, but that is you will have to work on that, because you have to integrate what has been the module that you get usually, and you have to work it over. You have to change it. You have to build it up, make it more strongly, reinforce it. But that's what the thing part. There's no magic in this thing as such. What there is there's a hot potato, which has been ready to cook for a long period of time.
I agree. But now China comes in and start cooking that potato. That's actually the whole story. It's true. Why? We need to ask ourselves, why has this potato that has been lying around for ages not been cooked until today? And I will come a couple slides later. I will come to the point. Who is actually losing out in this power game? I call it power game. I'm just giving you a kind of introduction, and hopefully I will stay within my time limit. But now the next point, let's go one step lower. Let's go to East Africa. So now on this East Africa, I'm aware that this has been around for a long time. The plans at least has been in the drawer for a long time, and we know also that a lot of American research institutes played a very good role in creating those plans in the 50s, 60s, when especially in Ethiopia, the dam, the Grand Renaissance Dam that is being built in Ethiopia goes back to American scientists that has been creating those ideas in the 60s, and it's being built already now. So a lot of ideas in East Africa, for example, has been already on the table for decades, but no one was able or willing to pay for it. But now a lot of money is coming out of China so that these infrastructure projects can be built. And this is actually the whole game-changing idea here about the Belt and Road Initiative when we bring in Africa into the picture. So what is happening in East Africa? In East Africa, we have different type of corridors that are shaping up and that will have a lot of effect on the livelihood of the people as well. And we have the Lamu port is here, Lamu, South Sudan, Lamu Port, South Sudan, Ethiopia corridor. This is this corridor, the yellow, the red starting from here. This is Lamu Port, goes up to Nairobi, up to Juba, and then to Addis Ababa, and then later to Djibouti. So this development corridor has been, a lot of Chinese companies are active in the Lamu Port development, and also the train connection, the standard GOG railway, SGR, is from Mombasa to Nairobi, has been inaugurated 2 months ago. So it's functioning, it's happening. So people can use those trains and go from A to B. The same is happening now from Djibouti port to Addis Ababa. These physical infrastructures are now in place. They are in place. They have been as an idea, they have been always around, but they are now in place. So they are effectively there. And this is, and how this can change the life of the people is easily described. For the transportation of cargo from the Djibouti port to Addis Ababa used 3 days. Now with the train, it's already 10 hours. So now we can imagine what kind of economic activity will happen actually through this one corridor development or one infrastructure within this corridor. And probably yesterday, the Ethiopian representative mentioned some aspect of it. So, and if we look at other development corridors, we have in Tanzania we have the port of Bagamoyo, which is somewhere here. It's not in the picture, but it's somewhere here. This has been only approved 2 weeks ago, that a consortium by Chinese actors and funding from Kuwait is gonna establish that port. So the reason why I'm mentioning these kind of big projects is just to show you what kind of change that can bring into the whole region, which are in the hinterland. Not only the port, but what happens behind the port. And here again, Chinese actors are really at the forefront, changing the narrative within the African countries. So East Africa is for me the main entry point to Africa when it comes to Belt and Road Initiative. I know that Egypt and Morocco have also a big stake in the development of the Belt and Road Initiative, but looking at the entire development of the initiative, then I consider that the East African region, starting from Djibouti in the north down to Mozambique, will have a bigger impact on how the Belt and Road Initiative will be coming into the African continent. And the reason why the Chinese attitude towards African countries is also changing is actually easily explained. So we have, since 2016, we have so-called China-Africa Industrial Cooperation Demonstration and Pioneering Countries and so-called Priority Partners for Production Capacity Cooperation Countries. Very interesting wording, but the point here is that those countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Republic of Congo, Egypt, Angola, Mozambique, these countries, they will become primus inter pares. They will become a bit better than the others. Because we observe the emergence of a two-paced China-Africa relations. I might have objection from my Chinese colleagues, but that's what we are observing now, that within Africa, we don't have anymore that big forum that every African country is equal. No, we have now kind of differentiation taking place because of those corridorization and the Belt and Road Initiative entry points. Now, another idea I want to give you is where is actually all the Chinese money? One of the questions today was, where do they get all the money? That's one question, but where is the money that flows to Africa? Where is that going, and which sectors is that going? So data from 2016 shows that most of the money goes to transportation and energy, and the other sectors combined goes here. But transportation is a big receiver of money from China. So it encompasses trains, roads, ports, etc. So this is a hint for you where the story goes. And if we go to, sorry for this presentation, but if we go to East Africa, then we see that Ethiopia is receiving a lot of money from China. And Ethiopia is putting this money into, I call it productive sectors. So they are building dams, streets, industrial parks. So these are all preconditions that you require to grow faster and farther. So if you don't put the money that you receive from anywhere into productive sectors, then probably you will not fly very far. So if we look at Ethiopia, sorry that you cannot see it perfectly because of the light probably, but if you see at Ethiopia here, these are the train connectivity, the planned train connectivities within the country. So the country is planning to have different train routes, and one of the routes I just mentioned from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, this has been already constructed, but there are in total 8 different routes that are planned by the government to be constructed at some point. So we have other actors like Turkish players in the system. We have also interest from Indian actors, but predominantly this will be built by Chinese enterprises. And at the same time, if you see those routes, you see also here the proliferation of industrial zones, industrial parks within Ethiopia. So all these industrial parks are being built along those train routes or train corridors, infrastructure corridors. So at the end, we will have a production corridors that are going between different countries, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Kenya, Tanzania, so that you have the entire sub-region hopefully industrialized at some point. Now, you can see nothing here, but the whole idea about this graph is Ethiopia had currently 22 different industrial parks that are either planned, built, or under construction. And if you see here on this, oh man, where's it? Anyway, most of them are built by Chinese enterprises. That's actually the main point. So most of these industrial parks are built by Chinese state-owned enterprises. And why those special economic zones industrial parks are not only in Ethiopia. They are also taking place in Kenya, in Tanzania, and others like Rwanda or even up to Senegal are following this footstep. So they are becoming important attraction nodes, that's how I call them, attraction nodes within the Belt and Road Initiative for Chinese companies who wants to go out to African countries. So without those industrial parks, you would not have a lot of Chinese companies going out. So another area I want to quickly show you is the energy distribution. So who is building the energy for African countries? Again, here we see a lot of involvement of Chinese companies. And if you see again, East Africa is predominantly active in this area. Energy consists anything from power plants, renewable energies, dams, etc. So East Africa is really hard at work here. And the distribution of Chinese projects and power capacity by sub-region until 2020, you see that Southern and Eastern Africa has received quite a number of these projects. So what is the impact for African countries? I know I need to watch my time, but so Chinese actors are increasingly controlling the East African corridor development. This is one takeaway we need to make, and they are working on the design, implementation, and also financing. So the entire supply chain is actually controlled by Chinese actors. What I call the infrastructure industrial complex is creating for African countries a very interesting mix. First of all, it is creating jobs. A lot of people get now work through these developments. But at the same time, we see also the first signs of dependency coming up. It's really important to know that. And we also observe a new relation forms between increasingly powerful Chinese companies and African states. So how do we manage those interactions? And here I'm talking about the industrial capital accumulations. What we heard earlier was that the money that comes from China is put into productive sectors. It's not a speculation money. This is money that has a long time horizon that can stay longer within Africa. Actually, the only source currently that can have this kind of time horizon. And this is distinctly different from the fast-paced speculative money coming from Western countries. But this is creating the industrial capital accumulations. The money that comes through Chinese companies to African countries is creating another topic, another contradiction or another question for African countries. How do you organize labor power of people when you employ them, and how do you organize your space? So space organization, labor versus money coming from China. This is one aspect we need to think really hard about. And then the new production centers, those industrial zones I was speaking about, they are also creating a new interaction against traditional partners, traditional trade regimes. They are being questioned, which is actually good. So traditional partners, with this term, I'm referring directly actually to European actors. Traditional development trade partners are increasingly losing out to new forms of manufacturing capital allocation, especially coming from Asia, from China. So that means if China can design, finance, and implement those production centers, then they can also put in new rules that can exclude easily people who they don't want. It's very easy. So that means capital allocation will determine which kind of companies will come in those centers and produce. The problem I see it is that traditional partners are still in the old paradigm in thinking. They still think within traditional assumptions, Africa is seen as aid-dependent continent, not as a continent full of chances. It is still seen with the wrong mindset. That is one of the biggest problems. It has to change. So new market allocation mechanisms increasingly make it difficult for companies from these countries to even enter the market. Even when they want to compete, they cannot compete anymore because they are excluded from the market. They cannot beat based on prices. So what will then happen if you even don't have the chance to enter the market? And we see this development happening in the telecom sector or in the infrastructure build-up. So, for example, all the dam building process right now in Africa is taking place only through Chinese enterprises. So there is no other specialized player here. So now one question that we have been discussing recently with Chinese colleagues is, could a trilateral cooperation, trilateral meaning bringing in the traditional players, European actors, China and African actors, can this be a solution to this dilemma, especially for European players? On the one hand, we can say yes, it could be possible, especially if European players can use already existing Chinese-built structures. For example, the special economic zones or industrial zones, they can be used by European companies to start producing in Africa as well. And then we think that traditional partners need to produce paradigm shift in their thinking towards Africa. So still, if we think that Africa is aid recipient country and is only not a continent of chances, then we think that they might not have a lot of success in the coming years. And on the other hand, we need also to acknowledge that China and African countries are not necessarily keen in working with European partners. If there is no paradigm shift, why should they work with European partners if it's working without Europe as well? So we see geopolitically a big shift happening through the Belt and Road Initiative on the African continent that is actually affecting European actors. So that is from my side. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, thank you.